This is a recording of the October 3rd, 2018 Institute for Research on Poverty webinar on protective and risk factors in low-income Hispanic children's early home environments. This webinar was co-sponsored with the National Research Center on Hispanic Children and Families and features Lina Guzman, who is research professor at New York University, Lina Guzman, who is director of the Child Trends Hispanic Institute, and Natasha Cabrera, who is professor of human development and quantitative methodology at the University of Maryland, College Park. Dr. Gennetian is the first speaker.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is Lina Guzman, so you can recognize our voices. Let's see, Dave, I'm trying to move the slide. Just a quick note, the National Center for Research on Hispanic Families and Children is also active on social media, as is IRP, so please tweet with us and join our Twitter chat as this webinar is going on. We want to kick off by acknowledging the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration for Children and Families, who've been a funding partner as a cooperative agreement with Child Trends and APT Associates, and is unique, I guess, in the following way. It's also a collaboration with 3 university partners, NYU, University of Maryland, and the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. The content of this presentation is the responsibility of the authors and not the official views of OPRE. So we wanted to kick off the webinar with setting a backdrop about why it's important to be investing in Latino children. You will notice, actually, let me pause for a second, that we will interchangeably use the word Latino and Hispanic, but we are indeed referring to the same population throughout the course of this presentation. So let's step back, and we want to share 4 important facts about Latino children today. The first is that roughly 1 in 4 of all children in the U.S. are Latino. They are the fastest growing and largest racial ethnic group among children in our country. Given their size and their anticipated growth, how Latino children fare, irrespective of their starting economic status, will have profound implications for the economic and social fabric of our country's future. Second, 1/3 of this large population of Latino children, as far as what we know today, reside in poverty. And we'll learn over the course of this presentation that another 1/3 reside in low-income households, that is above the poverty level, but still much under a median income level. This implies that the economic security of a large proportion of our children in the U.S. today who are Hispanic is quite precarious. Third, the vast majority of Latino children, over 90%, are U.S. born. In fact, the recent increases in the Latino population are being driven not by immigration, but by birth. However, although the vast majority are U.S. born, the immigrant experience is a reality for many. Half of Latino children have at least one parent who is born outside of the U.S. 3/4 speak a language other than English at home. And these are important characteristics to consider as we try to capture the real experiences of Hispanic children. That is, even within that population, there's quite a bit of heterogeneity. So finally, a 4th fact as context, 1 in 4 of all Latino children in the U.S. have at least one parent, based on our estimates at the center, who is an unauthorized immigrant. So this sets the stage in a variety of ways. One, asking ourselves questions about what we don't know about this important emerging growing population of children. And second, how can we think creatively and strategically about policies and programs? So I'd like to pivot for a second after those facts and share with you a conundrum, a puzzle from a Hispanic child lens based on analyses that my collaborator, Natasha Cabrera, will talk some more about later during this hour. Low-income Hispanic children lag behind their peers in cognitive and academic skills, have social skills that are at par or exceed those of their peers, but experience deeper improvements in cognitive skills, catching up and at times exceeding their African American peers. These characteristics of the developmental outcomes of Hispanic children raise some really important questions about what are the ingredients of family life and their home environment that might be contributing to these somewhat unfavorable, dimensions of children's development. On the other hand, somewhat favorable trajectories that we're observing in the data. One perspective that we've taken through the center, and I want to call out that one unique feature of our work in the center is indeed our interdisciplinary nature. I'm an economist by training. Lina Guzman is a sociologist and demographer by training. Natasha Cabrera is a developmentalist. And while that adds some interesting tensions and challenges in our conversations, it also very much deepens our perspective that we bring to answering a common question about the lives of Hispanic children. And this effort is not only empirical, but is also trying to deepen our understanding of racial ethnic differences by drawing on the various theories and insights we have available to us from our respective disciplines. And so I want to call out here, I'm not going to talk a lot about this, so I encourage questions. When we think about theories of why we observe socioeconomic gaps in children's developmental outcomes, the go-to theories often fall under these first two bullet points. So we think about economic investment and how parents are spending their money on children's home environments and how they might be trading off perhaps something about the quality of that environment with the quantity. We also tend to think about, and this is thanks to developmental theory, family stress and how the socio-emotional aspects of parenting might be affected by economic resources and then translate to differences we observe in developmental outcomes. These two theories, the first two bullet points, have also been dominating the framework we bring to understand racial differences, mostly black-white differences. What we'd like to see and what we'd like to kind of move forward and motivate is a deeper lens that can help us also think more deeply about ethnic differences. And to do that, we would argue you need broader theories and more integration. And so what we've tried to do is to bring in sociocultural theory. And this is an argument that human development must be understood as a cultural process in which parenting values and practices of a particular cultural group help shape daily routines and parental investments. We would also like to bring in a theory called developmental cascades that recognizes that the course of children's development is shaped through complex interactions across domains and over time. Now this is an example that makes this particular theory important for Hispanic children is exposure to a second language early in development has the potential to increase some behavioral aspects of children's development, but may also delay language at certain points in development, as children will learn 2 words for each concept. The last theory that we try to bring to the table is called the model for the study of developmental competencies in minority children, which is a mouthful, but also is equivalently important in our thinking about a foundation for Hispanic children's development in that it recognizes how race, social class, ethnicity, and gender might all interplay in the development of children's lives and their home life that explicitly includes racism, discrimination, and oppression. One thing that will become increasingly important as we think about low-income children and what might be different across racial ethnic characteristics of those children is the role of mothers as well as fathers, purely based on their presence in the family. One distinguishing feature, we would argue, of low-income and those who are living in poverty, Hispanic children, is that fathers are very present in their lives along with their mothers, along with many other individuals. So these theories allow us to also engage in how interactions between mothers and fathers might have further feedback effects on the child. So stress of one parent, for example, might have residual effects on stress of another parent. Much of our early work in the center tried to build off of the one most common fact known to most people in the U.S., which is the fact that a third of low-income children or children living in poverty are Hispanic, which is an important metric, but it is static and it doesn't give us a lot of information about what else is happening in these families. Starting from that point, we've devoted many years in generating important descriptive facts, deepening what we know and how we characterize low-income Hispanic children. We've been lucky to do this and do this from large nationally representative data sets, in part because, right, a secondary effect of an emerging and growing Hispanic population is that they're more representative in our national data sets. So to be technical for a moment, we now have enough sample size to look at Hispanic children in lots of government-funded, university-based, large, nationally representative data sets. What you will see in the next set of slides, that you will hear all of our voices, draw from these large national data sets. They vary from those that are very good at measuring income, such as the Survey of Income and Program Participation that's hosted by the Census, time use from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, information about family structure and fertility from the National Survey on Family Growth, and more detailed information that allows you to trace the path to children's developmental outcomes from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Program and the Fragile Families and Child Wellbeing Study. To help organize our thinking through this webinar, I encourage you to take a look at this very basic figure. This indeed captures the domains that we will talk about. We will start with family demographic portraits that range from household composition to fertility and housing. We will move to household economic circumstances and then pivot towards some of the mechanisms that we think may be enacted and activated upon within the lives of children related to time use, non-parental child care, maternal well-being, parenting, home environment, and then we'll end with findings on cognitive and social skills. You'll see at the bottom of this a nice ugly yellow bar, recognizing that our view is we will be looking this separately for Hispanic children, so identified mostly through their parent report of ethnicity. And you will see different comparisons. Some of it will be with other racial ethnic groups. Some of it will be Hispanics, low income versus Hispanics, higher income, and we will try to be clear about our comparison groups throughout the presentation. And I want to call out one other feature of our work is that through various points of this webinar, you will notice when we call out differences within the Hispanic group, mostly related to nativity status, sometimes related to English language proficiency, which we are starting to see in our data. Children in those groups, even within Hispanic, are exhibiting different patterns. With that, I will turn the microphone over to Lina Guzman.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So now I'm going to turn to our findings of research that we've been doing for the last 5 years to better understand what the families and households of low-income Hispanic children look like. And before I turn to the findings, I want to point out that much of our work, as Lisa was mentioning, does focus on low-income families. And we do that because they are the target population of many of the government programs and policies that we want to help inform. So in general, our work finds that low-income families and households, especially those with immigrant parents, are advantaged in a number of ways. We see high levels of family and economic stability, including high levels of parental employment. In fact, we find that adult employment is a defining feature of low-income Hispanic child households. And this is something that Lisa's work will show in a few slides. We also see evidence of stable two-parent families. and high levels of family functioning in terms of parental support, mental well-being, and parental investment. We also find, however, divergent family experiences between the U.S.-born and immigrant Latino families. In almost every respect of family life, foreign-born or immigrant Hispanics have family and individual characteristics that are associated with better outcomes for children and adults. And in the next few slides, I'll be sharing with you some of the highlights of our work in this area. So as you can see here, this graph depicts the marriage patterns of low-income Hispanics and how they compare to their white and black peers. So as a note, foreign-born Hispanics are depicted in orange, native-born Hispanics in purple, whites in the teal color, and blacks in sort of the gold tan color. And then women are depicted in the darker shades of the color and men in the lighter shades. So as you can see in this figure, we find that low-income foreign-born Hispanics are more likely to be currently married than any other group. And this is true for both men and for women. So looking at the first set of columns on the left-hand side, we see that roughly a third of foreign-born Hispanic men and women are currently married. In contrast, low-income U.S.-born Hispanics in the second set of columns more closely resemble their white counterparts, with just around a quarter being currently married. So thus, despite historical declines in marriage over the last several decades, the levels of marriage, at least among the foreign-born Hispanics, remain relatively high. So in the next two slides, we're going to be taking a closer look at the context of childbearing. And here we see that the percentage of low-income women and men who have a teen birth or birth before the age of 20. And this measure is particularly important as early childbearing is associated with poor socioeconomic and developmental outcomes for children and parents across all racial and ethnic groups. So as you can see in this figure, early childbearing is quite common among all low-income women. Looking specifically at low-income Hispanic women, again seen in the orange and purple bars, we see that approximately half have had a first birth by the age of 20, regardless of nativity. In other words, half of low-income Hispanic women have experienced or have a teen birth. And this falls somewhere between the levels we see for low-income white and black women. Interestingly, early births are much less common among low-income Hispanic men than they are among women. And in contrast to the patterns that we see among women, here we see large nativity differences. For example, we find that 30% of low-income U.S.-born Hispanic men, shown in the light purple colors, have fathered a child by the age of 20, and that these are levels that are comparable to those that we see among low-income black men. However, only 14% of low-income immigrant Hispanic men, shown in the light orange, have fathered a child by the age of 20. And the findings of the previous two slides come together in this one. Specifically, we find that most births to low-income Hispanic men and women occur in two-parent families, particularly for the foreign-born. So again, looking at the set of columns on the left-hand side, we see that 79% of foreign-born Hispanic women and 88% of foreign-born Hispanic men were in some sort of co-residential union at the time of the birth of their first child. And these rates are higher than they are for any other group. This finding is important because although children thrive in many different family environments, research tells us that in general, children fare better in stable, low-conflict, two-parent households. Also on the positive side, we see that the majority of low-income Hispanic children live with an employed adult. The vast majority of low-income Hispanic children, for example, with a foreign-born parent, 81% live with an employed adult, as do 64% of those with U.S.-born parents. And this is similar to that we see among whites, but higher than we see among their black peers. And again, this is good news, as adult employment is likely associated with greater economic resources and stability for children. Our research also suggests that much of the employment that we're seeing is being driven by fathers' employment, in particular among the foreign-born. For example, as you can see here, we see employment rates for fathers on the left-hand side and on mothers on the right-hand side across racial ethnic groups. And as you can see here, we see that the majority of Hispanic fathers are employed and that the rates of employment among foreign-born or immigrant Hispanic fathers are the highest among all of the groups. In contrast, when we look at mothers, we see that U.S.-born Hispanic mothers are employed at similar rates to their white and black counterparts, and that foreign-born Hispanic moms are much less likely to be employed. But being employed is just one feature of employment and work. And in the next couple of slides, I'm going to be delving further into some of the employment features of fathers, highlighting work that we're going to be releasing later this month. Here we see that not only that among those that are employed, the majority of Hispanic men are employed full-time. And research that we've done but not showing here also finds that Hispanic fathers are not only more likely to be employed, they also tend to be employed year-round and to work in jobs that they've had for at least a year or more. However, we also see here in this figure that about 10% of Hispanic fathers, whether they're U.S. born or not, report involuntarily working part-time work. So they're working, but they would like to be working full-time hours. This high level of employment and stable levels of employment, however, is coupled with low levels of education. As you can see here, half of Latino fathers have less than a high school education, and only a quarter have some type of post-secondary education. And this has important implications for mobility, not only for adults, lifetime mobility, but also for intergenerational mobility. In the next two slides, we're going to look a little further at fathers' job characteristics. And here we're looking at fathers' work schedules. And as you can see, roughly half of low-income Latino fathers have a job that with traditional work schedules, the Monday through Friday, roughly 9 to 5. And this is somewhat slightly higher than their black peers. This also means, or the inverse of this means, that close to half of Latino fathers work weekend and evening and night shifts. And this has implications for family routines and time spent together, which Natasha will be talking about later. While we're focusing on Latinos here today, a key takeaway, I think, of this slide is that the average low-income father is working evenings, nights, and weekends. And so we need to be thinking more about what that means for family life. Here we see that, here we take a look at health insurance. And again, here we see big differences by nativity. While roughly half of low-income U.S.-born Hispanic, white, Hispanic, as well as white and black fathers have access to employee-sponsored health insurance, only a third of foreign-born or immigrant Hispanic fathers do. So here we see large nativity differences with immigrant fathers being at less of a disadvantage. So to recap, our work on looking at low-income Hispanic child families and households finds that their families possess many of the characteristics that are associated with adult and child well-being, in particular high levels of two-parent families, and that this is particularly the case for the foreign-born. We also see high levels of employment, but this is often coupled with low levels of education, which has implications for mobility. Additionally, the work characteristics of their parents' jobs may not be ideal or conducive or optimal for family life. And we also see important differences by gender in employment patterns, which the work of Lisa that she'll be sharing with you will also echo. And finally, we also see, in many respects, large differences in the experiences of U.S.-born and immigrant Latino families. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who's going to be talking more about the work that she's been doing looking at economic stability and time use among Hispanic families. Lisa?
Thank you. So we started this webinar with a statement about how much we knew in static kind of metrics quantifying the lives of Hispanic children. And Lina's backdrop expanded to what these statistics might look like at a point in time, a little more deeply related to family composition, fertility, and father's employment. Part of the beauty of our work is that we can also think about dynamics. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about what we've learned in this set of slides about income stability, looking at 2.5-year time points over the past decade, and then we'll go back to, again, snapshots of what we've learning about time use and child care. As a highlight, we've learned that Hispanic children are substantially more likely to be low income than their peers, that is children who are in other racial ethnic groups. And that's true of all low-income children versus children who are living in high-income households. One distinguishing feature of Hispanic children that are in low-income households is the income is quite stable. Now, that can be interpreted favorably or unfavorably, and I'll show you some more data surrounding that. The source of income stability, to echo the findings that Lina just talked about, is earnings, and it's primarily contributions from father's earnings. We've also learned through our digging into the economic resources that Hispanic families who are eligible based on some income proxy exhibit much lower take-up of public benefits and report that lack of knowledge seems to be one barrier, but also immigration concerns, and note that the immigration concerns are as likely to be reported among U.S. Citizens and those that are born in the country as those that are not. And so the low-income Hispanic children are less likely to be in households that extract benefits from the stabilizing impact of monthly public benefits. We've learned that fathers' time spent with children is traded with time spent in paid work, Hispanic fathers, as opposed to leisure or other tasks. And we are also starting to learn more about the child care experiences of Hispanic children. Non-parental care use among 3 to 5-year-old low-income Hispanic children is actually comparable to white peers based on data from 2012, that's nationally representative, though lower than their Black peers. Okay. So let me just spend a second to walk through how to interpret this chart. The takeaway from this chart is that the gap between high income or rich and low income or poor is much larger among children in Hispanic households than children in non-Hispanic, that is white, Black, or other ethnic groups and racial groups households. So the way to think of this is if you see this black bar that's at 20%, across this chart. We took income for the entire population in this sample, and we split it in quintiles. We broke it up in fifths. If children are roughly evenly distributed across 5 income groups, then we would expect any bar with any cut we take based on other demographic characteristics to basically bump up to that 20% point. And that is far from what we see when we split the sample by ethnicity. What you do see here is a very skewed distribution of Hispanic children towards the lowest 2 quintiles. So these are roughly at about 200% of poverty. And then the opposite skewing for children who are in non-Hispanic households. With these data, we can also take a look at how much income changes in a monthly basis, quarter by quarter, over a 2.5-year period. Stability can have all sorts of ramifications for children's development related to chaos and routines in households, to stress in families, and also be an indication of the economic trajectory that the family is on. And so it is not clear a priori, I should say, whether stability is favorable or unfavorable. Stably in chronic poverty, one might argue, is not a favorable outcome. Unstable on a positive trajectory, one might argue it could be a more favorable outcome. With that said, little was understood about whether there was stability or instability amongst children in low-income households. In this chart, we use a metric of stability. It's technically called the coefficient of variation, although we have many other measures. The way you should read this is a higher bar vertically means more stability, more income stability. And the quintile distribution is similar in terms of our analysis as the chart I just showed you. And so what we see is that overall, income instability is higher among all low-income households versus higher-income households, and this might be what we expect. But we see some important distinctions once we then take the children in the households at the very lowest end of the income distribution and note that children in Hispanic households, I'm sorry, I have to correct myself. Lower bar is more stability. The Hispanic low-income households are more income stable than children of their peers in low-income non-Hispanic households. And so that's the circle that you see on the leftmost bars. We then ask this question, recognizing that monthly public assistance benefits might indeed, because they're expected, in most cases, might actually serve as a stabilizing form of income for eligible families. We asked this question about whether this income stabilizing influence was equal across children, low-income children, across racial ethnic groups. And here we found something interesting as well. So again, these bars are a measure of income instability. Lower bars means more stable, higher bars means more instability. And what we see here is that children in the low-income Black households, which is the third set of bars, appear to benefit the most from the income stabilizing influence of social assistance. So for children, Hispanic children on the left, the difference when we convert the cash value of public assistance and incorporate it into our measure of income does not have a very big impact on whether the children are more or less likely to experience stability. In contrast, for children who are in non-Hispanic Black households, incorporating that cash value public assistance has an enormous impact on whether they are living in income stabilizing households or not. Echoing a theme that Lina started, we then looked at the extent to which earned income is a stabilizing or unstabilizing force among Hispanic children. And here we see a theme that began with the story of adult employment being at much higher rates among low-income Hispanic children, being converted also in earned income stability. So here on the left bar, you see that average earnings is in the middle of white and Black households. The black bar gives you a sense of how much variation there is in average income. And here we see that the variation in earned income experienced by low-income Hispanic children is much tighter, meaning more stability, than the children who live in white, non-Hispanic households, where there is certainly, on average, higher earned income, but it is much less stable. I'm going to now pivot towards this question about time use. These are not dynamic measures. We are going to go back to snapshots in time. And these statistics come from the American Time Use Study. The work on income and stability naturally raised these questions about, well, how are parents spending their time? If fathers, for example, are working more or working during non-traditional hours and are a source of earning stability, is there a trade-off occurring in family life in the time that they're spending with children? So it was very much motivated from observations that we were gleaning on the household economic domain side. So in this chart, you will see there are dots that represent the number of minutes spent in the prior 24 hours across 5 tasks: housework, paid work in purple, time spent, this is all reported by the parent, time spent watching TV, time with children, and leisure. What we can conclude from this chart is that low-income Hispanic mothers spent substantially more time on housework and less time on paid work or leisure than low-income white or Black mothers. When you look at these data over time, you see that this trend is very similar, but does not statistically differ, actually, across these groups. So now if we look at the equivalent analysis among low-income Hispanic fathers, and just a note here that these data are amongst residential fathers, so it does not count non-custodial fathers as a function of the data design. Here we see that low-income Hispanic fathers spent substantially more time on paid work and less time on housework or leisure than low-income white or Black fathers. In this next chart, we try to unpack a little bit about what it means to spend time with your child. And we can see here an average day, low-income Hispanic mothers spent nearly 2 hours with their children. Most of that is, as self-report, and caring for and helping their children. And this substantively looks quite similar to their white peers. That's all I want to say there. When we now pivot to fathers, we find that in an average day, low-income Hispanic fathers spent 45 minutes with their children. So substantively lower than mothers, but this is similar across all racial ethnic groups. Of that time, roughly 33 minutes were spent caring for and helping their children. And here, Hispanic fathers are qualitatively reporting less time on these types of activities with their children. Before I turn it over to Natasha, I want to share two statistics or two sets of statistics about non-parental child care. This is drawing from the National Survey of Early Care and Education, which is nationally representative from 2012. So here, in general, we see that approximately half of young Hispanic children in low-income households are in early care and education arrangements. On the left-hand side, you'll see that the average is 49%, with some differences on whether the Hispanic child is in a U.S.-born or immigrant household. The real story here, however, is in the ages of children. And we see that parity is quite similar for attending for preschoolers. In summary, Hispanic children are concentrated in the lowest income groups, up to 200% of poverty. Despite higher income instability among the lowest income groups overall, lowest income Hispanic children are more income stable than their lowest income non-Hispanic children. We are not seeing, at least statistically, evidence of less time spent with children overall, Hispanic children compared to their peers. Residential low-income Hispanic mothers spend more time with children than low-income Black mothers. Time spent with children appears to converge over time when we're looking at the past decade among low-income fathers across racial ethnic groups. In more sophisticated analyses, we did try to estimate this trade-off between Hispanic fathers' time spent in paid work and time spent in children, and we do find a relationship of for every hour spent in paid work is unfavorably associated with time spent with children that we don't see in other racial ethnic groups. Hispanic preschoolers appear to be accessing non-parental care arrangements at similar levels as their peers. I'm now going to turn the slide set over to collaborator Natasha Cabrera. Okay, folks, I do hope we can hear Natasha's voice as part of this presentation, but let's move forward in the interest of sharing some of the good work that she's done thinking about maternal well-being, children's home environment, and children's social and cognitive skills. And most of these analyses are from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Survey. Children's well-being depends in large part on the well-being of their parents, the quality of the parenting they receive, and their early home experiences. And what Natasha has been able to do is pull the sample of babies born in 2001 and closely examine the racial ethnic differences in these various aspects of family life. So we're looking at parents' mental health, the quality of marital relationships, One thing I want to point out throughout these analyses that I will be representing Natasha is that the comparisons here are going to be with white boys. And this is predominantly because white boys tend to perform at naturally levels that are much higher than other groups. So they're an interesting group to draw comparisons from in light of simplicity. Looking across mothers' reports of depressive symptoms, we see in this chart that mothers across ethnic groups report similar levels of depressive symptoms. There are a couple of things to note here. One is that this gold mustard color represents Latina girls, the purple represents Latina boys, and the aqua, the white boys. And unlike the other presentations here, you have a nice developmental backdrop to understanding patterns. So looking at children at 9 months, at preschool, 3 to 5 years old, and then at kindergarten. And you note here that maternal reports of depressive symptoms is similar, I think similar across these age and child developmental milestones, but also similar across racial ethnic groups. When we next turn to marital conflict, mothers of Latino boys report more marital conflict, so higher bars, than girls. But these are not statistically and substantially different across racial ethnic groups. You see a pattern of naturally increasing conflict as children slightly get older in preschool, but the racial ethnic differences are not statistically different. In this next slide is a measure of marital relationships. So this is relationship quality, where again, higher bars represent higher quality. And here again, mothers across ethnic groups report similar levels of being happy in their marital relationship. I'm going to next turn to parenting. Here data are available at 2 time points when children are 24 months and then again at preschool. And looking at the data, we see that mothers of Latino boys and girls exhibit less responsive or sensitive parenting than mothers of white boys. And so the aqua bar in this case is much higher, meaning more responsive, sensitive parenting that we know from other literature is highly correlated with children's subsequent developmental outcomes than the mustard or the purple bar. It also means that there is very little distinction amongst mothers of Hispanic or Latino boys versus their girls. We also learned from these data that Latino boys and girls are consistently read to less often than white boys. So across these developmental stages of children, white boys, the aqua bar, are just read to more frequently. And there's no distinction, again, within Hispanic children between reports of reading to girls versus boys. So a moment ago, I just talked a little bit about estimates of reading to children. This is, of course, one way that children can hear language and become comfortable with early literacy. Another way is through storytelling. And here we see in this chart, as Latino children get older, so if you're looking across the bars over time, they hear stories from their mothers as often as white boys do. So again, just a reminder, we saw some real distinctions and differences on the measure of reading, but not so much on a measure of oral storytelling. I'm going to switch to what we're seeing on children's developmental outcomes. In infancy, Latino children exhibit similar cognitive skills as white boys. You'll see a huge growth in cognitive skills, as might be expected, between children at 9 months, the first cluster of bars here, versus 24 months, the second cluster of bars here. And you see that there are no racial ethnic differences in this measure of cognitive skills. We are starting to see some distinctions or disparities emerging as children get older, specifically on vocabulary. So Latina girls, the mustard color bars, vocabulary skills in preschool are similar to white boys, but lag behind by the time they are in kindergarten. There are 2 aspects of children's development that have predominated in the literature. One is cognitive and the other is social and emotional and behavioral. Fortunately, all are available in the ECLSB. And here we can take a look at children's social skills, and we see a theme that seems to be percolating across some of these slides. Latino children's social skills seem similar to boys at preschool and kindergarten, and a little distinction across Latina girls versus Latina boys. In summary, Latino children live with two parents who are relatively happy, report low conflict, and low depressive symptoms, or less likely to report any depressive symptoms. Although Latino children are read to less often than white boys, they hear stories as often as white boys, especially when they are older. Latino infants show similar levels of cognitive abilities in infancy, but their language skills lag behind by kindergarten. However, in terms of social skills, Latino children show no deficits. We have thought about what kinds of policy and practice implications may be drawn from this large generation of descriptive statistics through these data sets. And here we are in a developing stage in converting the implications. And we want to note the following for early childhood programs. Latino children live with two parents who are relatively involved and provide warmth and support. And we're gleaning this not only from quantitative data, but also qualitative data that Natasha has collected and analyzed, but do not appear to provide as much cognitive stimulation as seems to be provided among their peers. We think this means slightly different types of targeted support for Latino parents and their children around enriching activities, encouraging their storytelling rather than redirecting potentially to reading that might not be happening naturally in the household, and continuing to support social skill development that also seems to be happening at naturally high levels. Family functioning seems high and relatively positive. We should aim to harness that, continue to offer support for parents, particularly mental health and co-parenting, and be very deliberate about reaching both parents as we design and provide outreach through programs and services. I'm going to switch the microphone back to Lina.
Thank you, Lisa. So picking up on where Lisa left off, I want to say a few words about what this all might mean for policy. So the first, I would argue that there's a demographic and economic imperative. Simply put, the size of the population that is Latino is too large to ignore. And the child population that we've been talking about will be part of the workforce in 20 years. So to make sure that Latinos can contribute to their full potential and that the workforce, not only to society but to the workforce, is going to require a concerted policy effort that cuts across education, poverty reduction efforts, job training, and healthcare, to name a few. And let me say a few words about immigration, which I would argue may be one of the biggest policy issues facing the Latino community today. First, there's a growing body of work that suggests that our immigration policies may be one of the biggest drivers of poverty among Latinos. And more broadly, our nation's immigration debate and policies are not only affecting those who may lack legal status in the U.S., but the broader Latino community. We see through our work and that of others that policies are having a chill effect on the broader Latino population and deterring many from applying for programs that they may be eligible for and need. And let's not also forget the 1 in 4 Latino children who are living with the real possibility of losing a parent to deportation. So rarely is social science research ever this clear, and the evidence on this matter is abundantly clear. Children need safe and stable relationships with their parents to thrive. And with rare exceptions, parental separation is bad for children. And finally, we need to better understand which policy levers may help to move the dial most for Latinos. So for example, is it increasing the earned income tax credit given their high rates of employment, expanding overtime, or for example, expanding the Affordable Care Act given their low rates of health insurance? Oh, sorry. forgot how to move the slides. And to close, I just want to say a few words about the National Research Center on Hispanic Children and Families, which was just funded last week for another 5 years. So we're looking forward to producing more research and being a resource to you all in the upcoming years. So the Research Center is a hub to help improve policies and programs better serve low-income Hispanic children and families around 3 priority areas: poverty reduction and economic self-sufficiency, healthy marriage and responsible fatherhood, and early care and education. And we do this by conducting research, building capacity, for example, through networking with other key stakeholders, supporting emerging scholars, and also developing tools and databases for the broader research community. And we also implement an innovative communication and dissemination approach. We care very much about making sure that the work that we're doing is getting into the hands of those who can most use it. So I encourage you all to visit our website, which has all of the research studies that we've been talking about today, as well as a number of tools that can help researchers identify the best data sets to help answer the kinds of questions that they're interested in and in terms of the Latino population. In addition, I also wanted to say a few words about our virtual scholar network, which is intended to connect folks who are interested in doing research around Latino families, in particular those who are at their early career stage, and connect them with more established scholars.